The land west of Perdition Ridge bore little softness. It blistered in summer, froze hard by mid-autumn, and cracked open like an old wound in the spring rains. That country carved lean men and mean lives. And among them was Hiram Teague, a widower with a voice like gravel and eyes sunk too deep to ever catch much light. 3 years had passed since typhoid took his wife, Ruth, and the youngest boy, Samuel. Hiram buried them beside the old cottonwoods east of the house, where the ground was stubborn and the crows always came. He didn't mark the graves. There wasn't much point in naming what had already become dust. He kept to the ranch after that, didn't speak much in town, hired no hands, drove cattle alone and sold at auction without bargaining. His beard grew in gray patches and his hands stiffened from the cold each winter, but he never complained, not aloud, not even to the Lord. Folks in Bitterroot Crossing stopped asking how he was. They let him be, and he let them forget he was ever more than a shadow with a horse, until the day of the dance. It was the spring gathering, Bishop Weaver's field dressed up with oil lanterns and fiddle reels. Girls wore ribboned dresses sewn through the long winter, boys polished their boots and fought for who'd get first pick at the cakewalk. Old men drank from jars and shouted over the fiddlers, and the preacher pretended not to see. Hiram came late, not dressed for it. Just wanted a look at the cattle lots behind the tents. But noise drew his eye, mean laughter near the big barn, a circle of young men, boys really, making sport of something, or someone. He didn't mean to get involved. He hadn't gotten involved in anything since the soil turned wet above Ruth's coffin, but something made him stop. She stood in the firelight, shoulders back though she flinched every time they laughed. A dress too simple for the occasion, brown muslin hem to hide the worn places. Her hands were clasped so tight her knuckles had gone white. But it was her face that kept them jeering, or half of it at least. From temple to jaw, one side bore the tight, twisted map of old burns. The skin had melted and healed hard, shiny in the light. Her right eye blinked slower than the left. A scar pulled the corner of her mouth down just enough to look like a sneer when she smiled. "You come dressed as a ghost," sneered Levi Doherty, son of the banker. "You'll scare off every horse in town, miss." "Best stay away from open flames," added Colton Reddick, who'd once bragged about branding calves blindfolded. "Might finish the job." The girl didn't cry. Hiram watched her chin quiver just once, then go still. She turned to leave, and one of them grabbed her sleeve. It tore. Her shoulder showed through, bare and pale. That's when Hiram stepped forward. No one saw him until he was inside the circle. The boys laughed again, nervously now. Hiram's height gave him weight, and his silence made it worse. He reached out, took the torn piece of muslin, and handed it to her. "That how your fathers raised you?" His voice hadn't been used much, but it came rough and clear now. "To tear at women like dogs on meat." The boys bristled, but none spoke. Hiram's name still carried weight in town. He'd built that ranch from nothing, buried 2 sons and a wife. People remembered that kind of loss, even when they tried not to. "She got no place here," Levi muttered, backing off. "Oughta be grateful we let her come." "She's got more place than you," Hiram said. Then he turned to her. "Come on." She didn't move right away, then nodded, took his arm like it burned. They walked out together, past the fiddlers, past the stairs, past the preacher who narrowed his eyes but said nothing. He didn't ask her name until they reached his wagon. "Clara," she said, quiet. "Clara Boone." He nodded. "Hiram Teague." She looked like she already knew. For weeks after that, she came by the ranch to leave fresh bread or wild herbs by the stoop. He never asked her to, never thanked her either, but one day he left a blanket folded there for her. Next time, she brought a sack of seeds. Their conversation never stretched long, just enough. "You got kin?" he asked once. "No. Why'd you come to Bitterroot?" Figured the men here might not care about the face so much. He didn't reply, but he didn't look away either. When the summer came, the sun laid its weight heavy on the plains. Hiram's well ran low, and a wildfire took part of his west field. He came back singed, bleeding, and half dead. Clara was already at the house. "She'd come to check the goats," she said. "She never left." She slept on the porch the first week, then in the storage room, then in Ruth's old bed, though neither of them ever said it out loud. The land was harsh, but they were alive and they were too. In town, the laughter died slowly. The boys didn't speak to Clara, but their mothers watched with strange expressions when she came for supplies. The preacher asked twice if she and Hiram were living sinfully. Hiram said the preacher was free to inspect the goats and see if any had opinions. That winter the snow came early. Clara tended the fire while Hiram braved the hills to bring down elk. She learned how to set snares. He taught her to mend fence wire. They didn't talk much, but sometimes he'd find her humming while she worked. The sound made his chest ache. One night she asked him plain, "You ever think of marrying again?" He studied her face in the firelight. She never covered it, not for him. "I buried Ruth with both boys, thought that'd be the end of it." She nodded, staring into the coals, "But maybe it's not." He looked at her long, then said, "Maybe not." In the spring, when the thaw came, Hiram rode into Bitterroot Crossing alone. He spoke to the preacher first, then bought a silver ring at the trading post, nothing fancy, just enough. The same boys from the dance were there, all grown a bit taller, none wiser. When they heard what was planned, the snickering came back, not loud, but cruel in that quiet, sneaky way. "She's cursed," Levi whispered. "Gonna wake next to her and see hell looking back." Hiram waited, didn't speak, but he looked Levi in the eye long enough to chill the marrow. The wedding was set for the next Saturday, right in the church. No one thought he'd go through with it, not in public, not with her. They didn't know Hiram Teague, not really, not yet. And they didn't know Clara Boone either, but they would. The day of the wedding came with wind. It rolled off the highlands like a slow breath, warm and full of dust. Bitterroot Crossing had seen its share of odd unions, shotgun vows, and trading post arrangements, but nothing like this. Nothing that made people whisper behind closed shutters or peer from behind lace curtains with mouths too tight to smile. Clara wore no veil. She sewn the dress herself, plain gray with a darker sash at the waist. The fabric was borrowed from one of Ruth's old trunks. Hiram had offered it without a word. It fit snug across her shoulders and fell to her boots. Her scar was bare. She never tried to hide it. Hiram shaved for the first time in over a year. His suit smelled of cedar, pulled from the chest where Ruth's things once slept. His hair had gone white at the temples. His back was still straight. They walked into the church side by side. Silence met them, then the rustle of skirts, the scrape of a boot. Not a word was spoken. Levi stood near the back, arms crossed, jaw cocked. Colton smirked like the whole thing was a joke he was willing to sit through for the punchline. Clara didn't flinch this time. The preacher cleared his throat and opened the book. His hands trembled faintly. Hiram met Clara's gaze and held it. She didn't blink. When the vows came, she said, her steady voice like split pine, rough, real, and clean through the middle. "I take this man," she said, "to stand beside him in storm and sun, in silence and blood, till the earth takes us both." Hiram's reply was shorter. "You're mine, that's enough." When the preacher declared them man and wife, they didn't kiss. They just stood there, nodding like a deal had been struck fair. Some folks clapped, most did not. But outside the church, something shifted. A boy no older than 10 came up and handed Clara a wildflower, yellow and trembling in the wind. She smiled down at him, that crooked, scorched smile that had scared them once. The boy didn't blink. Behind him came his mother, Martha Klein, whose husband had lost the north pasture to drought. She offered Clara a jar of sweet pickles and said she hoped they'd suit. Then others followed. Quiet gestures, pie tins, seed sacks, nothing loud, but something had turned. Back at the ranch, they shared bread by lamplight. No music, just wine through the cracked boards and a fire that burned low. Clara sat beside him, their knees touching. Hiram didn't say much, but his hand found hers beneath the table, and he held it there, rough and still. Spring melted into summer. The goats dropped healthy kids and the cows bred true. Clara took to the land like she'd been born of it, setting traps, hauling feed, stripping bark for salves. She never asked Hiram to talk, but when he did, she listened without blinking. He told her about Ruth once, about how she'd laughed like a whip crack and didn't fear snakes or childbirth. Clara nodded, said she sounded like someone who didn't belong in the ground. "Neither do you," she added after a while. "I'm already half there. Then I'll hold the other half up." Hiram didn't answer, but something unknotted in his shoulders that day. He began to sleep through the nights. By the next gathering at Weaver's Field, no one dared mock her. Clara walked in beside Hiram with a basket of smoked jerky and dried apple. The fiddlers paused. Then one started up Shady Grove. It was an old tune, the kind Ruth used to hum. Clara tapped her heel to the beat. Levi Doherty stood across the lot, jaw tight, flask in hand. His father had taken ill that spring, something in the lungs. Levi drank heavier now, wore the bitterness like a coat. Colton had tried to buy a piece of Hiram's eastern range and been refused flat. He hadn't forgotten. Trouble came after the harvest, in the form of a fire. It started in the dry brush near the barn, where Clara kept her herbs strung and sorted. Flames ate fast. She saw them first and ran, saved the animals. Buckets weren't enough. The whole west half burned to ash. Hiram found her kneeling in the dirt when it was done, black soot on her face, eyes red from smoke. She didn't cry, just sat there with her hands in her lap, still and hollow. "Wasn't lightning," she said. "Wasn't an accident." He believed her, no questions asked. They rebuilt, slowly. Word spread about the fire, but no one came to offer help. Too many still thought it unnatural, that marriage. Too many remembered her face. Winter came harder than most. The creek froze early and Clara took sick from the cold. Fever gripped her for 4 days. Hiram sat by her bed, reading aloud from old newspaper clippings, cattle prices, weather reports, scraps she'd collected and saved. When she finally stirred, she whispered, "If I die, plant me facing east." "You're not dying." "If I do, I want to see the light first." He nodded, kissed her hand. The burned scars twisted under his lips, and he didn't pull away. By spring, she was back on her feet, leaner, paler, but standing. Hiram brought in extra fence posts from 3 Pines, and when he passed through Bitterroot, he spoke to the sheriff. "I want it known," he said. "If anything happens again on my land, I'll deal with it myself." The sheriff nodded, but slow. "You saying someone set that fire?" "I'm saying I buried 3 already. I know how to dig." The sheriff said nothing else. Clara didn't go back to town that spring, not even for seed. Hiram brought everything she needed. He didn't ask why, and she didn't explain. But one night she stood outside the house, looking toward Bitterroot. Moonlight lit the scars on her cheek like a map, all silver and raised. "They meant to scare me off," she said. "I won't go." "You're Teague now," he said. "They'll learn what that means." And they would, just not the way anyone expected. Summer rolled in dry as bone. The river dropped low enough to show its rocky bed, and the cattle drank dust. Hiram rationed water for the garden, but still half the squash wilted in their vines. Clara dug trenches by hand to catch the morning runoff. Her fingernails bled, but she didn't stop. When the well ran dry, she rode to the nearest spring at Widow Gable's old place, 2 miles through hornet-thick sagebrush. Hiram told her not to, said it wasn't safe alone, but she only tied her hair back and went. That was the day they left her a warning. She returned with 2 full buckets sloshing against the mule's sides and a paper nailed to the front post. It was written in charcoal, the letters crooked, big enough to read from the road. "Go back east." She stared at it for a long time before pulling it down. Didn't speak of it until supper, and even then only said, "They want me gone worse than they want you dead." Hiram didn't reply, just took the paper, fed it to the stove. That night he oiled the shotgun and left it loaded by the door. They started sleeping in shifts. Clara kept a blade under the mattress, an old skinning knife with a worn handle. Hiram strung bells on the fence-a-line. Twice they found boot prints near the smokehouse. Once Clara found a rabbit nailed to the barn door, split open, flies thick on its tongue. It wasn't about land, wasn't about pride. It was punishment for being seen, for standing upright in the light. "I lived quiet before," she said one night, sharpening the knife with slow, practiced strokes. "Kept to back kitchens and root cellars, let folks pretend I wasn't whole." "You were whole. I was hidden." Hiram didn't argue. He watched the way her hands moved, steady as rain on stone. "We'll outlast them," he said. But they didn't come to outlast. They came to ruin. It was mid-July when the drought took full hold. The sky stayed white. The wind carried dust across the porch in gray waves. Clara's herbs shriveled to straw. The goats bawled with hunger. The cattle wandered to dry gullies and wouldn't come back. Then the cistern was poisoned. It was Clara who smelled it first, drawing back with the dipper halfway to her lips. She spat and swore and dumped the whole bucket on the ground. Dead lie, enough to burn a hole in a horse. They buried the barrels, dug another well. Clara didn't sleep that night. She sat by the window, hair down, knife across her lap. "This ends soon," she whispered, "one way or another." A week later, the sheriff rode out, said there was talk of trouble, said Clara should stay inside a while, maybe leave town altogether. She stared at him until his throat bobbed. "You here to protect me? I'm here to keep peace." "There's no peace in backing down." Hiram stood beside her, arms crossed. "Let them come," he said. "We've got ground, we've got guns, we're not moving." The sheriff rubbed his mustache and didn't answer. Trouble came 3 nights later, moonless, windless, too quiet. Hiram saw the flicker first, torchlight by the fence, 4 men, all wearing sacks over their heads. Clara didn't hesitate. She took the rifle, climbed onto the roof, and lay flat across the shingles. Hiram stayed on the ground, shotgun in hand. The first man threw a torch into the dry woodpile. Clara fired once. He fell without sound. The others scattered. Another shot cracked through the dark. A scream followed, then silence. When morning came, they found 2 bodies. Levi Doherty was one, face blue, stomach red, his mask still half on. The other was Colton's cousin from over in Dry Hollow. The third man limped into town by noon, bleeding from a shoulder wound. He didn't speak a word. Sheriff came back, hat in hand. "You killed them." "They tried to burn us alive," Hiram said. "I'd do it again." "Some say it's murder." Clara stood behind him, rifle at her hip. "And what do you say?" she asked. The sheriff looked from her face to her hands, then down to the dust. "I say the land's hard enough without good people dying on it. No charges." He turned and rode out. The funerals were quiet. Levi's father didn't speak. Neither did Colton. Clara didn't attend. But something shifted. A line had been drawn. No more threats came. No more warnings. No more poisoned water. In town, folks started nodding again when Hiram passed. A few women even asked Clara for salves, for help with sick calves or dried-out bread. She gave what she could, never smiled unless she meant it. The preacher said they'd acted with too much violence. That forgiveness was the Lord's way. Clara only said, "The Lord didn't drink from my well." After that, he kept his sermons to salvation, not judgment. Months passed, the drought broke. Rain came in sheets, darkening the hills and filling the gullies. Flowers pushed up where fire had stripped the soil. Clara planted new herbs. Hiram built a shed with a taller roof. They worked side by side, shoulder to shoulder. Some nights she'd hum again, old tunes, ones without names. Once she asked if he believed in evil. "Not the devil kind, the born kind." "I believe in silence," he said, "in what people let grow when they say nothing." She nodded, then we cut it out by the root. That autumn they drove cattle to market, sold for double what they'd hoped. Folks shook Clara's hand without looking away. Some even called her Mrs. Teague now. She didn't wear powder, didn't hide the burns, she didn't have to. And when Levi's brother passed her on the street, he tipped his hat. She didn't tip hers back. The mountain wind sharpened as fall deepened. It swept through the pass like a blade and carved the mornings clean. Hiram and Clara laid down cedar planks in the root cellar, patched the north wall, and salted enough meat to see them through any storm. They worked in rhythm, no words wasted. Days passed like wood shavings, shorn clean, silent, curling inward. Then came the letter. It was nailed to the ranch gate one morning after the frost. No seal, just a folded page, yellowed like it had waited too long to be read. Hiram pulled it loose and opened it with calloused fingers. Clara watched from the porch, arms crossed. Inside was a single line, written in a looping hand neither of them recognized. "Her father waits." Clara went still. Her mouth tightened, but she said nothing. Hiram looked at her. "You know what that means." She nodded once, then turned back into the house. He followed, didn't press. That evening, she told him. Her father had been a blacksmith near Durbin Creek. a cruel man, loved fire more than family. When she was 15, he beat her with a stove poker for letting the horses loose. That night, she ran with matches in her pocket and struck them one by one in his tool shed. I thought the flames would eat just the tools, she said, but fire doesn't stop. She tried to pull him out when the roof came down. That's where the burn came from. He lived, she added. Somehow, spent years in the infirmary near Franklin. I heard he left. No one said where. Now they knew. Someone stirring the past, Hiram said. Clara nodded, and it's still burning. The next days were tense. They checked the fence lines, looked for tracks, found none, but the air turned thick, heavy with waiting. One night the goats broke into a frenzy. Hiram grabbed the rifle. Clara followed with the lantern. They found nothing but hoofprints, too wide for deer, too wrong for elk. By morning, one goat was gone. Its trail led up the rocks, blood speckled along the way, vanishing near the ridge. The next letter came 2 days later, slipped beneath the barn door. She burned her blood, she'll pay it back. That night, Clara didn't sleep. She sat outside with a coil of rope and her knife. Her face in the moonlight looked carved from something older than stone. By the week's end, they heard of a stranger in Bitterroot Crossing. Big man, gray beard, eye clouded on one side, rode a black mule, asked about a scarred woman, called himself Boone. Hiram rode in alone, sat quiet in the saloon until the man showed. Watched him order corn whiskey, watched the way his hand trembled just slightly before the glass reached his mouth. "You Boone?" Hiram asked low. The man didn't answer at first, then nodded once. "She's mine," he said, "by blood and by fire." "She's mine now," Hiram replied. Boone laughed dry cracked. "She owes." "Owes what?" "Everything." Hiram set his glass down. "Then come collect it, at the ranch, not behind letters, not behind goats." Boone stared. "You'd die for her." "I already did. I'm what came back." The man didn't speak again, just turned slow and walked out the saloon doors. Back at the ranch, Clara had already packed a second rifle and the good bullets. She looked up as Hiram returned, eyes dark, jaw firm. "He coming?" she asked. "He knows where." They waited 3 days. On the 4th, he came. Not alone, 2 others with him, young, raw-faced boys who thought Boone was something like legend. They came at dusk, walking the ridge, rifles slung lazy, like they expected a quiet talk, a beg, a scream. They didn't get one. Clara fired first. One of the boys dropped like a stone, throat cut by lead before he saw her face. The second turned, fired wild, missed. Hiram shot once clean through the shoulder. The boy screamed, dropped the rifle, and ran bleeding toward the trees. Only Boone remained. He stood at the edge of the porch, hand on his belt, not reaching. Clara stepped forward. "I tried to save you," she said. "You chose to burn." "You were born poison," he spat. "I should have drowned you before your first step." Hiram raised the rifle. Clara lifted her hand to stop him. "Not yet." She stepped closer. The wind tangled her hair, lifted the hem of her dress. The scar on her face caught what little light remained. "You want blood," she said. "Take mine, take all of it, but you'll do it on your knees." Boone hesitated. Then he lunged. He made it 2 steps before her knife hit his thigh, buried deep. He crumpled, screaming, hand grabbing for anything. She stood over him. "You thought the fire made me small. It made me sharper." She took the knife back, clean, slow. He begged. She didn't answer. He bled out in the dirt, the same way the goats had, the same way he once left her. They buried him without a marker. When the sheriff came, Hiram spoke quiet and plain. "He trespassed, threatened, left 2 boys for dead. We ended it." The sheriff looked down at the blood dark in the dust, said nothing for a long time. "Finally, I'll call it settled." After that, Bitterroot stayed quiet. No more threats, no more letters. The land grew still. Clara sat alone some evenings, staring at the porch edge where her father died. Once, Hiram asked her what she saw. "Not him," she said. "Me, finally whole." He nodded, took her hand. Neither of them spoke again that night. The seasons turned like worn pages. Winter rose hard and bright that year, snow crusting the trees like salt. The land quieted under white, and the house creaked with the cold. Inside, Clara stitched a wool shirt for Hiram, her fingers raw but steady. He brought in firewood each morning before light touched the hills. They didn't speak of what had passed, not aloud. The graves behind the barn were covered now, one marked, two not. Coyotes padded along the ridge but kept their distance. The stillness wasn't peace exactly, but it was earned. Clara changed in ways no one saw but Hiram. She moved slower sometimes, hand pressed to her side like something inside had pulled loose. But she never mentioned pain. She kept working, kept rising before the sun. Her face no longer flinched at reflections. She stopped turning her head to hide the scars when someone looked too long. One day, late in March, a rider came from Southridge with news. A cousin of Ruth's, distant, almost forgotten, had died, leaving a deed and a patch of river land further east near Elkton. The cousin had no kin left but Hiram. "You could sell it," the rider said, "turn the land into coin." Hiram watched the sky while Clara read the paper. He said, "You ever want to leave this place?" She folded the letter and slipped it into her apron. "No, but maybe one day I want a choice." That spring they rode out to Elkton to see the land. It was fertile green with wild barley and thick cottonwoods. The river there ran clear, no dust, no ghosts. Clara walked it barefoot, letting the mud suck at her heels. She touched a young sycamore and smiled. "You think this could be a beginning?" she asked. "I think beginnings are quieter than people expect." They kept the land, built a small cabin by the water the following fall, just a roof and a chimney, a place for after, a place beyond survival. But they still returned to the Bitterroot Ranch with the first frost. In town, the whispers had long since dried up. Folks tipped hats, asked after calves, after goats, after each other. Some even brought their daughters to Clara, asking how to keep a home from sinking when the world tried to pull it under. She taught without preaching, showed them how to steep burdock for fever, how to salt hides before they rotted, how to wait when there was nothing but waiting to do. Once a young girl with a hairlip asked her, "Did it hurt?" Clara didn't ask what she meant, just answered, "Yes, but only until I learned it belonged to me." In the quiet hours, Hiram grew older. The pain in his legs crept higher, and the cold sat deeper in his bones. He didn't complain. Clara brought him tea with nettle root, and he'd sit watching her work, the lines around his eyes softening. One morning he didn't rise before dawn. Clara found him in the chair by the hearth, arms folded, breath shallow. "You leaving?" she asked. He opened his eyes, just waiting to see if the light's worth chasing. She crouched beside him, her hand over his. It always was. That winter he slowed for good. She kept the ranch, hired a boy from Elkton to help with the fencing. She slept in the same bed as always, his rifle by the door. In town, someone carved a plaque, "Teague Ranch, Eston Fire, held in iron." No one asked permission. They didn't need to. When Hiram passed, it was in sleep, in thawing spring, just as the goats birthed early. Clara wrapped him in the wool shirt she'd stitched and laid him beside Ruth and the boys under the cottonwoods. She marked his grave this time with a stone she carved herself. It said, "He stood with me." She didn't weep, but she didn't speak for days after. The Bitterroot wind came back like it always did, cold, constant, carrying the old sounds of men and ghosts. She stood in it, long skirts snapping, the scar on her cheek pale beneath the morning. Some said she'd leave then, let the land go, take the river home near Elkton. She didn't. She stayed. She kept the fences mended, the garden turning, the goats fat. Each year she hired one more girl and then another, girls whose fathers didn't want them, girls too scarred to marry. She gave them tools and ground to stand on. When folks asked what kind of woman Clara Teague had been, long after her hair had gone silver and her bones brittle, they said only this: "She wasn't made for mercy. She was made for return."